Hi, it's me, Gitte Larsen again. Today I will show you the second method for calculating the profitability of an analysis, the second method that we're going to look at this semester. The second method here is called the internal rate of return. And like in the previous video, we are going to take a look at what is the internal rate of return, how do we use this method, and then we will go over in Excel and do a simple example together. Okay, so what is the internal rate of return? So you can simplify this and say, well, the internal rate of return will tell you what is the return of the investment. You know, you set up these variables for the investment. You have an investment sum, probably a scrap value. You have some expected changes in your income. So you set up this table and you calculate what are the net payments for this investment. Now, if all of these assumptions, just like when we talk about budgeting, if all of these assumptions are going to be exactly the way that we predict, then we can calculate using a function in Excel called the IRR function and calculate what is going to be the return on this investment. Now, the return on this investment, the IRR, the internal rate of return, is the critical value of the investment. Now, the critical value of all investments is where capital value is zero. Perhaps you remember from the previous video and from class that we discussed or we talked about that the critical value for all investments is where capital value is equal to zero. So when we find the internal rate of return, we actually find where capital value is zero. Now, we compare this internal rate of return with the calculation rate. Remember that the calculation rate was the minimum required return we had on this investment. So by comparing the internal rate of return is what can we expect in return of this investment if all of our assumptions are going to be the way we predict. If we compare that number together with what is the minimum required return, then the profitability criteria for the internal rate of return method is that IRR must be higher than or equal to the calculation rate. You have to make more than you require. So just remember that the calculation rate is the minimum required return. Let's go over into Excel and look at a simplified example on this. We will use the example that we did together demonstrating the NPV or the capital value method. So if you remember and could find it in your own computers, this was the example that we used. Okay. So what we want to do now is to find the internal rate of return. I'll just write that. Internal rate of return. Now, as usual, my computer is Danish, so I will find the Danish name for it. But what you are going to look for now is a function called IRR. Okay, so go up here where you can insert a function. Now, if you haven't already, let me just move it over here, haven't already used the function, go up here, find financial, and then scroll till you find IRR. And in my case, I want to find this one. I'm not going to do the Danish translation here. So Excel is asking for some arguments, okay? And the only values that we have to give into Excel right now is actually our net payments, this column. Now for this function to actually function, we need to start with a negative input. So we need to also insert the investment sum in this case. So insert the whole column for our net payments, press enter, and here you have the internal rate of return. So if we are going to stick with these assumptions that what we have predicted here is going to be exactly like this, we can expect to have a return of 16%. And now we compare it to the calculation rate over here. Now this was what we were requiring for this investment. This is what we want in return from this investment. Now the internal rate of return tells us we can get 16. We wanted 12. meaning we get more than we required, the investment is profitable. Just like the capital value also told us that we had a profitable investment. Using the different method is not going to give you different results regarding whether this is profitable or not. Just one little note. Now, just for fun, let's try and prove that this is actually where we have the critical value. This is where we find where capital value is equal to 0. Place yourself in the cell where you'd used the NPV function to find the present value of our future payments here. Go up in FNX and open this window. Now for interest or for rate here, change this to the 16% that we just calculated to be the IRR. Now if you press enter, look at the capital value while you do it. 0. So just a little fun to prove that we have actually found where the critical value, where the capital value is equal to 0, which is where we have the critical value of all investments. Okay, I'm going to change this back because this was not necessarily what we wanted here. So this was, in all its simplicity, the internal rate of return. We're going to elaborate on this in class. So have some questions ready for me and we will see each other in class.